Okay, so my name is Joseline Nicholas, and I'm a real estate broker. I am also a full-time real estate investor, so I work in real estate full-time. I've been investing in real estate for the last 7 years, and our team works in the Hamilton, Guelph, Kitchener-Waterloo area. If I was to pick a superpower, it would be building wealth through real estate. And I love sharing this because I've seen what real estate has done for my clients as well for myself. So if I could bring that to our clients, I'm always happy to talk about real estate investing. Okay, so today we will be covering estate planning. This is such a heavy topic to talk about. And that is the reason why I want to start bringing it to our clients, discussing these things. Obviously, as I said, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not an accountant. So most of what I'm talking about today is things I've seen, I've witnessed in the business, just seeing how estate planning has impacted transactions in the business. And also just in my personal life, obviously, I live here in Ontario, so I've seen situations that have come up simply because we didn't have proper plans in place, or maybe some family members did not have proper plans in place. So I will be sharing some examples towards the end of the presentation. But we'll look at some definitions, and then we'll look at the benefits of having a will. We'll look at how estate planning relates to real estate, and then we'll go through the examples and steps to get started if you are thinking about getting started in estate planning. So what is estate planning? So I did a lot of, studying as I was looking around in Ontario, how these things are defined, and these are the best definitions I could find. So estate planning is the process of arranging for the management and disposal of one's assets during the person's life in preparation for future incapacity or death. And I think this is the important thing that most people will leave out. They think that we're planning for after we're gone. But in some cases, actually, you're actually preparing for, whatever could happen, be it incapacity, such as a disability, or, death. And it's such a difficult topic to talk about because these are not, happy times for people, and most people have a difficult time discussing it. But the most important thing you can do right now is do it because it's for your family. In most cases, it's not for the person who's here, it's for the family that they're leaving behind. So this will include a will, the power of attorney, an executor, guardians for minors, etc. A will is defined as a legal document that sets out what will happen to your assets, your money, your property, once you die or once you're gone. With probate in Ontario, this is the legal process through which the court grants a person the ability or the authority to act as an executor, or they confirm an executor's authority and formally confirms that the deceased will is their last will and testament. And probate in Ontario will take anywhere from a few months to years. Like I've seen situations where it literally will take years, and if the family has not prepared for that, it is not a happy place to be in. And I'll give you some, this is one of the examples that I have in my examples because it's something that could tear a family apart, both financially and just relationship wise. Alrighty, so these are some statistics to look at. So there was a survey that was done maybe 2 years ago, where they were looking at Canadians, and a sample of Canadians was sampled out, and they found that 53% of Canadians have a will. And out of the 53% of Canadians who have will, 50 of them have not updated it in the last 5 years. They also found that 20% of those over the age of 55 don't have a will. And they found that 69% of people between the age of 35 and 44 do not have a will. So if you're wondering where you rank among the people, these are just the numbers that will enlighten you. When I look at these numbers, for me, I'm a little concerned, especially because I know how important that document is. And that is why I've made it my mission literally to speak to our clients, to speak to anyone who will listen really about the importance of having a will in place. Who should have a will? Ideally, anyone over the age of 18 should have a will, and it should be done by you. So nobody can do a will for me. I have to write it. I have to prepare it myself and sign it. And when I sign, it has to be in the presence of two witnesses. Some people have done it online. I've seen clients who've come to me and say, oh, I found a link online and I was able to do it. I personally do not recommend that, especially if you have assets. I think it would be better if you met with professionals who can guide you in the process. The cost is usually anywhere between, I'd say anywhere from $1,000 to maybe $10,000, depending on how complex and how detailed you want your will to be. But you can definitely stick with a professional, especially a lawyer and an accountant, to guide you in the process of creating a will. One of the things I've learned, and why I'm so burdened to speak about this, is the amount of taxes that you pay, especially if you don't plan properly in Ontario. So I would like to encourage everyone to connect with their financial advisor or their accountant to see how their assets and how their situation, if something was to happen to you today, what would that look like? How much taxes would you have to pay to the government? And is there a way you can reduce that? Because we talk about, building wealth and generational wealth, but what's the point of working so hard to, have a sizable, net worth and then only to have it cut by half when you pass on? What if you could take care of the situation such that you are in a strong position, such that anything happens to you, you've managed your affairs well to minimize that tax burden? Because the government has put these laws in place for a reason. They want people to utilize them. So what I'm talking about today is nothing illegal. It's all legal ways that the government has put in place to allow people to plan ahead and to structure things right, such that they can minimize the tax burden. And if you skip that step, sorry, I don't know if you heard the beep, it's my security system. But if you skip that step, I feel like maybe that's why the government has put it in place, so you can pay a penalty for not doing it right. Some of the benefits for having a will in place or for having proper plans is to provide for the family when one is gone. So I find that for my clients who have done proper estate planning, they have means to provide for their families. It could be through, insurance policies that one has purchased, or even just the assets that they've had. They've protected them the right way, and they have made sure that once they're gone, your loved ones will have a means to survive. This is especially important if you have young children, making sure that you have plans in place for them to be taken care of, at least until they're 18. Another reason why it's important to have a will and to have all these documents that we're talking about is to make sure that the transfer of assets in your family go accordingly. They go according to how you would have wanted it to be. What happens is if you don't have a will in place, so you don't have any plans in place, the probate will be done according to the laws and regulations in Ontario, and that might not be the way you would have wanted it to be. So one of the reasons why we should be planning is to make sure that we have the right plans in place to make sure that the assets that, for example, if you have, assets that you want to leave to your family or even to charities that you care about, the only way to make that known is if you put it in writing. So another reason why it's good to have plans is to plan for uncertainties like disabilities. When I come to this point, I talk about power of attorneys, and that's people who are in place to make decisions for you if you can make those decisions. And I've seen it before, where it's literally like the worst thing that could happens to someone, and there's no one in place to make these important decisions. That is not a good place to be. So that is one of the reasons why, if you are here and you're listening, I'm encouraging you to go and make sure that you meet with a lawyer and an accountant to look into your affairs. Make sure you have the right people in place. I've seen, some of my clients, even like when I look at their documents, they have a different person for the healthcare type of decisions, and they have a different person for the financials. And this is something that you might be able to ask your lawyer or your accountant to see what works better, but it's something definitely that we should put in place. Another reason why we should all have wills is to make sure that we maintain control of things that are important to us. I'll give you an example. I've heard of a story where it was a man who valued education so much. They were the first in their family to go to college, so they wanted generations and generations and generations in their families to go to college. So they set up a trust that would pay tuition for their family members for as long as you go to university and you get a university degree from any university in Ontario. That trust was there to pay for your tuition, and they set it up such that it would not run out. They had investments, and those investments would feed back into the fund. So it was a fund that lasted generations. But anybody in that family that wanted to go to university, they had their tuition already covered. So that is something that was important to that individual, and they were able to set plans in place for generations and generations of their family to be taken care of. So I really like that, because you get a decision in how you want your assets or your money to be used once you're gone. The biggest of all reasons, I think, if we were to stop and think about it, is just tax planning, because as I was saying earlier, the government has put methods in place, or some people like to call them loopholes, but they're not really loopholes. These are things that the government have put in place to say, if you do this, then that happens. So I was shocked recently to learn that in Ontario, and I'm speaking especially for people who own real estate, you have to pay a 1.5% tax or a fee. It's called a probate fee on everything you own. For people who own real estate, it's easy for somebody to own, $10 million worth of real estate, especially in the Southern Ontario. If you own a couple properties, so easy to get 10 million. You have to pay tax on the 10 million, regardless of whether or not you have a mortgage. I found that to be surprising. So I wanted my clients to know that, because if you don't plan for it and you're gone and you have $10 million worth of real estate, you would want your family to have a plan in place of how to deal with that. But if you don't have any plans in place, then they get to, deal with it when it happens. First of all, they're grieving. And second of all, they have to deal with such problems that are so expensive to fix. So that's why I'm always talking to my clients to learn about it right now. Like in real estate, whether you own one property, you own 10 properties, you worked so hard to accumulate what you have. Why would you just give it away? And I also learned that there are ways to plan for it better, such that you can reduce your tax obligation. To know more about this, you have to speak to your accountant. And I have to also say that make sure you're working with professionals who know what they're doing. Not every accountant knows, not every accountant is a tax accountant. Not every accountant is an estate accountant. So you have to make sure that the person you're speaking to understands what you're talking about and they have experience dealing with it. When I was looking for a lawyer, I was looking for somebody who has at least 10 years of work experience in this area. I wanted to see that they work for a firm that has a department that specializes in these things. And the reason for that is it's a friend of mine, a lawyer, told me this. With wills and estate planning in general, most of the times you don't even know there's an error, because this document will be executed when you're gone. So if you have somebody who's an amateur or who doesn't know what they're doing, or this is not their specialty, maybe they're a real estate lawyer. A real estate lawyer, most of them, they specialize in real estate. They don't really know estate planning. So that's why it's very important to make sure that you get the professionals who understand what they're talking about, and they can guide you and help you, and you can lean on their expertise and experience to make sure that you plan properly for your family. So in real estate, all real estate, with a few exemptions, must go through probate. And probate can be really, really, really long. I think if I was to say one thing, is that things would take longer than they seem to be, especially if you didn't have any plans in place. That alone will take at least a year to figure out what must be done. So the concern that I've seen, especially in the industry, is that people do not plan for that time. You know, if this, probate will take a year, you have to have some things like who's going to pay those expenses, who's going to pay your water bill, who's going to pay your property taxes, who's going to maintain the property, who's going to make sure the grass is cut for that 1 year while you wait to go through probate and eventually sell. So that's why when you sit with a proper professional, they can guide you and they can show you the steps, and you can have all these things already written out. If this happens, there's funds here that can cover the property tax bill, there's funds here that can cover the maintenance of the property while the family goes through the process of probate. This is a complicated and time-consuming process, and if you have a relationship with the lawyer, it's good to have those plans in place and also have them guide your family through it. It could take from a few months to a few years, depending on how complex the situation is. For properties for sale, there's usually two choices. It's either the property is being sold, or a family will inherit the property and change ownership of the property. Either way, there must be, the property has to go through probate. If the property, so I've said here there's a few exemptions. If the property is owned through a company, then the company does, like if it's owned by a corporation and you own the corporation, I think there are exceptions there. Also, if there's a joint tenancy, for example, a principal residence where it's you and your wife or you and your husband, the surviving spouse has the right of survivorship. In that case, it will not have to go through probate. But what I would say is, don't take my word for it. Go to your lawyer, go to your accountant, make sure that you ask them specifically. Because I think even when you're buying your property with a lawyer, you will choose how you want to own that property, and there's multiple ways of ownership. So what I'm saying here, don't take my word for it. I want you to take your documents to the lawyer and say, this is the title for my property. How do I own it? Are we, the way, if something was to happen to me, what would happen? And then you'll see if that's what you want to happen. If not, you can work with your lawyer or your accountant to create a will and to have all those documents in place, such that if something happens to you, you already have plans in place. I also wanted to say that, if you have a will or all these documents that we're talking about, you need to make sure you have originals, and you have to make sure that you communicate that information with somebody, because they cannot use copies to get started with the process. They will need originals. And if there's no will in place, this will be a long process, and the probate will follow the provincial laws and regulations. And they might not be what you could have wanted. I've heard that in Ontario, they will give the first $300,000 to your spouse, and then the additional funds will go to the kids. Don't take my word for it. I think that if you wanted to dig deeper into this, I'd say go meet with your lawyer, go meet with your accountant, find out. But I know that whatever the laws are, it's probably bare minimum, and it will not be what you would have wanted as a person. So don't wait, go and get it done. In Ontario also, I already talked about this, there's what's called a probate fee, or the Ontario Estate Administration Tax, and this is the 1.5% on the value of the estate. So as I was saying, if you have, let's say, $1 million worth of real estate, and you could have a mortgage on it, like you could have 500,000 mortgage, as long as the value of the property is 1 million and you own a car and you own a few other things, the total of the value of the estate, you have to pay a fee of 1.5%. And that's not all you're paying, right? Because once you do this, this is just like the first fee. There's a lot, like then you have to pay taxes on like the probate tax. And I've heard in Ontario situations where it's gone over 50%. Like I know a story of someone, I'll give this in the examples too, where they had to pay 50% of the estate as a tax, and the family had to keep like less than 50 if you include the 1% that they had to pay. So plan ahead. And what's sad is that this could have been prevented, or there's ways that they could have planned better to avoid all these expenses. Okay, so this brings me to the examples. In terms of like what I've seen, some of this has happened to some of my clients, people I care about, and I've been there, some maybe like family members. The first example that I'd like to bring is, an example of a blended family where a husband and a wife were living together. They each have kids from their previous relationships. So it happened that the wife had her own house and the husband had his own house, but they got married. When they got married, they moved into the husband's house. So the wife's house was rented out. However, before they got married, the wife had a will. And her will stated that everything she owns has to be split equally among her 3 kids. That's what her will said. So when she got married to this other gentleman, the gentleman had kids, she had kids, they started living together, and the gentleman passed away. Based on how they owned he didn't have a will. So, according to the rules and regulations, they have a joint tenancy. So she gets ownership of his property, and she's raising all the kids, right? His kids, her kids, she's raising them. And then she passed away. So when she passed away, because she was the owner of this principal residence, which was the husband's house. Now she owns both houses. And in her will, that hasn't been updated in a long time, it states to split all her assets among her 3 kids. And that's exactly what happened. So they took the 2 houses and all the other assets that they own, and they gave them to the wife's kids. And the husband's kids had nothing. Such a sad situation, but this is what happens when people don't plan properly. Maybe if she would have updated her will to include the husband's kids, that would have been, a better situation. But in this case, like, it's unfortunate, and no one was intentionally doing something to hurt anybody. It was just poor planning. And in this case, the husband had no will. So it basically was one of those situations that's sad to see. Another one that I have seen a lot is also conflict. One example in particular is there was this family where the son lived close to his parents. He took care of them. He was there, day and night, making sure the parents are good. Mom passed away. And then, of course, he lived there. He had a sister, but the sister lived in another province where she was working to take care of her own family. And it came time for the dad to pass away. And the dad had a will, and he had his estate planning in order. So he sat his kids down to say, this is what I'm going to do. I'm splitting my estate equally between the 2 of you. But the son was so hurt because he felt like, I've been here, I've been working hard, taking care of you. My family is here. We never moved anywhere. She doesn't deserve anything, right? So then this man is here witnessing his kids fight and argue and quarrel like that. But the beauty of it is that he had time to talk to them and resolve the situation before he went. Now imagine if he had no will. What would have happened? It would have been just a lot of lawsuits and fights and even resentment, but the fact that he had a will in place, and he was there, to communicate his plans to his kids, he was able to address all these questions that his son had. He was able to explain himself as to why he's doing what he's doing. And in the end, the kids were not fighting against each other because the father was there to explain himself. And the father was there to make sure that his son understands what he's doing and why that is important to him. So that is the beauty of just having a will in place and being able to communicate it. And sometimes people would debate, there's a debate out there, should I communicate my plans to my family or should I not? I'll say, it's probably better that you communicate it, because if there's any differences or any arguments or any questions, you can address them and you can kind of explain it where it's necessary. I know sometimes you don't want to explain and probably don't need to, but in a situation where you have the opportunity to make sure that your family gets along well and there's no conflict, this is definitely a good idea to be able to sit down and explain that to your kids. So for that gentleman, it worked out very well because he had his plans in place and no one was fighting with another when he passed. They kept, their life went on and they still get along to this date because they understand where the father was coming from. The third situation is one that breaks my heart the most because it involves minors. Single mom passes away without a will in place. And the banks, what they do is they freeze our accounts until things have been sorted out. And because there's no will in place, there's no legal guardian for her kids. Now imagine a situation where these kids are left without a guardian and without access to any funds whatsoever. Like, this is so heartbreaking. And for the courts to go through probate, that takes a really, really long time. A really long time, So that was the situation that's the situation that happened. And it was so heartbreaking, which is why, if you're a parent and you're here, and sometimes, like, for example, like for this single mom, she was very young. I don't think she thought that something would happen to her. You never know what could happen. Anything can happen to anybody. But to protect our loved ones, that's why we have to make sure that we have plans in place for our loved ones. As soon as that happened, and I saw it happen, I saw it unfold, that's why I was like, okay, I need to speak to our clients. If indeed we're adding value to your wealth and we're adding value to your family, I know this is a heavy topic that nobody talks about, but I'm telling you, have plans in place because your loved ones will appreciate it very much. The fourth example is one that involves heavy tax. So in Ontario, and you can confirm these numbers with your accountant, but there's a fifth. So basically this family, so what happened is the father was passing away and he had no will in place. And I understand that even if he had a will in place, if he had not planned properly, he still would have paid this tax. But anyway, so he had about $1 million in his RSPs. And when he passed away, the family, obviously, they probably were expecting to get like 800, maybe, resolve some of the issues that they had, cover some expenses, split among themselves. But what happened is after you pay tax to the government, they were only left with 500,000. Now, I'm pretty sure this man worked very hard, very, very hard to save up $1 million in his RSPs. And 50% of that goes to the government. Now, I've spoken to some financial advisors and some accountants who have showed me plans as to how this could have been avoided. There are ways of, maybe making withdrawals early and maybe investing in other assets, or, there are ways to structure these portfolios. I'm not going to give accounting advice because I'm not an accountant, but I think if there's one thing you can take away is that this doesn't have to be your story. You can literally plan ahead of time, know that the government will take everything. Like, basically what happens in this case is the government will take whatever they want, they'll give whatever is left to your family. And I don't know if that's a good thing. What if you had more control of the situation? Especially because it can be done legally. Like, those laws were put in place for a reason, so we could use them. So what if you can do it, plan ahead of time legally, such that this doesn't have to be a family story? The hard work you've done to save up, $1 million in arrest fees, I'm thinking that this man worked really hard for his entire career. And to have the government take away 50% of it is almost unfair. But I think that's why they have those laws in place, so we can access and use them. And if we don't, it's us hurting our family. So, that also breaks my heart, which is why I'm using it. And I have a lot of examples. Like if I was to tell you stories that we see, like it's heartbreaking, And in addition to this, the family is grieving. Not only that, sometimes there's also conflicts, people who don't get along, all that, like it's just mess. If we have control to be able to fix these things ahead of time, why can't we do that, right? The fifth example is one that I was just talking about, long delay in probate, where mom passed away, there's no will in place. Her kids, they have their own households, but they have to keep up with the maintenance of the property and keep up with all the expenses. And nobody, especially in the way things are today with inflation and everything being so expensive, most people don't have extra cash to put into a property on a regular basis, right? So that was such a challenge such a financial strain on the family to keep up with all those expenses that long. And sometimes what ends up happening is the maintenance of the property isn't kept up, so the property starts to deteriorate. And that will impact the value of the property. That will impact the asset that you're leaving to your family, right? So in this case, it was such a difficult situation for the family to, come together and come up with a way to maintain the property for a year while this goes through probate. If you have proper plans in place, this will not happen because you will have planned ahead for this. And also, if you have, you have your affairs in order, maybe it won't take that long to go through probate. Maybe it doesn't have to take a year. Maybe this will be the case where it takes a few months instead of years. So that's why it's very important. And I've seen even in real estate transactions, to sell a property that's going through like an estate sale, a lot of properties will have, basically you have to know what you're doing. You have to work with a professional who knows what they are doing. For example, from a real estate perspective, the agreement of purchase and sale has a lot of clauses. Some of them, the seller guarantees this, the seller guarantees this. You have to work with a realtor who understands what they're doing. Because if you are an executor and you're selling a property, or you have this property that you have to sell, you might not know all the things that are wrong with it. You might not know all the things that are right with it. So why are you guaranteeing things? So you have to work with a professional who understands what they're doing, who understands the agreement purchase and sale, and who knows how to protect you and your family. Because in all these matters, lawsuits. It's all about lawsuits. Which brings me to point number 6. Parents pass away, there's a will in place, but some families members disagree with the terms of the will. And right now, as I'm speaking, lawsuits are still going on where the siblings are suing each other. Now, in a place where siblings are suing each other, imagine if it's your family, like the families are torn apart by this. Maybe the family should have, and in this case, there was one sibling that lived with the parents, was still taking care of them. So the other siblings feel like this one sibling forced his parents to favor him. And they're saying that he doesn't deserve the share that he got. And he's saying, I left my career. I left everything to come and take care of them. I deserve everything they've given me. So then it's a lawsuit that's ongoing. And when you look at both points, the other siblings had careers. He didn't, because he stayed back and took care of his parents. It's such a complicated situation, but I think in the end, I don't know how the courts will settle it, but anything involving lawyers and courts, it's money in the pockets of the lawyers, money going to the courts. Like, it's not money going into the siblings' pockets. And let alone the relationship, the drift that will be there among the siblings. So for me, like, if you were to ask me, these are some of the reasons why I'm always thinking for our clients, if we're working so hard to build wealth, financial freedom, generational wealth, if we skip this part, this will set us back at least by 50% if we're lucky. So that's why I was thinking this is probably a bigger component of wealth building, because not only do you have control of how your assets are distributed, but you also have control of, if you start planning early and you work with the proper professionals, you have a chance of avoiding paying 50% on taxes. Like that is not anything that anybody should be looking forward to, especially given how hard you have to work to accumulate anything. Anyways, so if you are thinking about estate planning, where should you start? I would say first and foremost, you have to define your goals. What do you want to achieve? Financially, especially and people have asked, how young, how old do you have to be? Anybody over the age of 18 should have a will. And people will say, I don't have any assets. And a lot of the times we're talking about estate planning, people think about asset, but liabilities too. If you have debt, even if you're in debt, you have to have a plan in place for who's going to pay for that debt. In fact, in case of a liability, you might even have to talk to your family to make sure that they know and they understand. Because if you are gone and they have to pay for these expenses anyway, like, I'm pretty sure you'd rather have a plan in place for how to take care of these things if something were to happen to you. Why am I saying this? I'm saying it doesn't matter what the net worth is. I think that it's better to have a plan in place, and as your life changes over time, updating those plans accordingly. So the first thing you have to do is define your goals, where you want to go. If something was to happen to you today, what would you want to happen with the belongings you have? And some of these things don't have to be, financial assets. It could just be like things that you treasure, very special, something that you like to leave for your friend or your best, things like that. Because if you don't have any of these in writing, nobody is going to know what to do with it. Then you have to take inventory of your assets. You have to look at your savings, investments, retirement plans that you might have, life insurance. And in this phase, for those who are, I've heard, like when I was talking to my accountant, he said, this phase, especially if you're under the age of 70, they can literally help you structure your portfolio such that it's easier for you to have that plan in place and you're paying the lowest of taxes at the end of life. And you have to also look at liabilities. Like I say, if you have mortgages, credit cards, car loans, etc., what happens to those? After you've taken inventory of your assets, you have to connect with the right professionals, lawyers, accountants, financial advisors. And you probably, for me, when I'm looking to hire a lawyer, I will literally go on the internet. I research 10 of the top choices that I can find out there in Ontario, estate lawyers, and then I'll interview all of them. I'll at least email all of them and hear from them, see how they differ. I'm pretty sure when you speak to all 10 that you can find, like if you shortlist a list of 10, and then you email all of them at once, look at responses as they're coming in, you will be able to see who you can work with. And you might end up with the top 3, and you can interview all 3. See their level of experience, level of expertise. You can ask questions, see how comfortable they are with answering the questions. See, how, like you can use your own judgment to see, but picking a lawyer or an accountant or a financial advisor, same applies to financial advisors. Honestly, I feel like with financial advisors, this is something that you have to be careful about, because there's so many financial advisors, and I have to say that some of them shouldn't be advisors at all, because they don't have the experience, the expertise. At the bank, if you go to any bank right now, you find a list of financial advisors. And guess what? I learned that some of them are just they're just interns, right? University students who are just there to work for 3 months or 4 months, and they're giving them the title of advisor. This kid has no experience whatsoever, has no business advising me on anything. Maybe I'll take advice in other areas of life, but not in the finance area. So when you're looking at financial advisors, and this is a big one, a lot of people have lost a lot of assets because of sticking to the wrong advisor. Make sure that you're speaking to somebody who's worth of giving you advice. Sometimes I ask questions, like if I need a financial advisor, I want to know what their net worth is. And if they can't tell me, why are they advising me financially, right? I want to know what their net worth is, and I want to know where their money is. if they don't invest in those particular, like I want to know how they're investing, how they're growing their portfolio. If they don't have, if they haven't invested, they don't have the experience or even the right to give advice. And I know this is a little too direct, but it's just the truth. Who are we taking advice from? You know? So when you're connecting with professionals, vet them. Make sure that they're worthy of giving advice. Same applies to accountants because there's so many accountants, different kinds of accounting. If somebody is, they do books for people, they shouldn't be giving you estate tax advice. It has to be a specialist. If there's one thing I could say out there is be careful who you take advice from. Then after you've connected with the right professional, put your plans in place. And of course, tell your loved ones about it. You don't have to tell everybody. You can pick the closest, dearest, or even the ones that you trust to keep the information and let them know where to find the documents if anything was to happen. I have seen situations where the family does not claim insurance because they don't know that you have that policy. They don't know that you have all these different things that you sign up for. So they don't claim, or they don't know where to find the information. They don't know who your lawyer is. So I would say I've even when I'm having these conversations with other professionals in the industry, they say, if you're going to pick an executor, at least let them know or ask them if it's okay, because it's such a tough job and it has to be somebody who's prepared to do it, especially if you have such a complicated plan. Make sure that at least you inform one or a few of your closest family members or people you trust so that somebody knows where to find things if something was to happen to you. Again, you have to review and update your plans as needed. Like if there's a major event or something happens in your life, you have to make sure that you review and you update your plans. For example, you get married, you get divorced, you have a child, you buy a property, you have an asset, like all those things, you have to make sure that you are reviewing and updating plans as needed over time. And I think reviewing and updating is so easy once you have them in place, because it's just a matter of contacting the same professionals that you've been working with and telling them to add in this one thing. And if you do that, your family will thank you. Okay, so that's about it. This is my contact information if anybody has any questions. Once again, as I said, we have a YouTube channel where we post all our recordings. So you can find it by searching my name in YouTube at Joseline Nicholas. And if you would like me to connect you with any of the professionals that we work with, please let me know. I'll be happy to do so. And if there are any questions, put them in the chat box. In the meantime, I'm going to start by answering questions that were submitted earlier. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to look at some of the questions that were submitted earlier. Alrighty. Okay, so some of the questions that I have here are, when does an estate plan become necessary? At what age should I have one? I think we just talked about this, and I think that anyone over the age of 18 should definitely have a will or something in place. And when does it become necessary? I think that nobody can ever predict that. Like, you just have to be ready. You have to be prepared. Could be any time. Hopefully not. But the truth is, we don't know what could happen. And when you speak to your professionals, accountant or lawyer, you'll find out that there are two kinds of wills. There's one that takes effect upon death, and there's one that takes effect if something were to happen to you where you're disabled or you're incapacitated. There's also a will for that. Who is going to make all the medical decisions and who's going to make all the financial decisions? In most cases, the advice has been that it shouldn't be the same person, because you might have somebody who you feel more comfortable dealing with the numbers, but they're not the same person who you feel comfortable making a decision such as a big health decision. So speak to your professionals and they'll be able to elaborate on that. Question number 2 is, I'm still buying my first home in Canada. Should I be considering estate planning right now? I would say yes, because I know that owning an asset such as the home will change a few aspects of your estate planning, but I would say have an estate plan in place and then update it as things change in your life. For example, if you buy your first home or you buy a second home, third home, you can still update that document. It's a living document that you can update and sign on a regular basis, but it's better to have it in place than not. Third question is, I have no immediate family in Canada. How can I do estate planning to make my parents nominees who are foreign passport holders? That is such an interesting question. What I'll do is I will have to get back to you on this one, because this is one that, you know, lawyers probably have to be creative. But yeah, it's an interesting question that I have to dig deeper on that and get back to you. Yeah, I think there's probably multiple ways around that, but again, I don't want to give the wrong answer. So it's better if I connect you with a professional who can give you a more solid answer. I think it also depends on where they are, right? So I will definitely dig deeper on that and see if you have family members who are away. And also the same applies if you have assets out of the country or out of the province. Because I remember when I was speaking to my lawyer, they had to make sure that, you know, assets that we have outside Ontario are treated differently from the assets that we have here. So those are all questions that are very good for your estate planning lawyer or any estate planning professionals that you might be working with, starting with a lawyer. Do you have a reference for a good lawyer for estate planning in GTA? Absolutely. I will connect you with them anytime, maybe tomorrow or the day after. The next question is, I am an immigrant and might want to retire in my home country. Do I still need estate planning? Will it be beneficial? Yes, I would say if you are an immigrant and you have assets here, you should definitely have a plan in place. The reason for that is, what happens to your assets? Because your estate plan is for managing assets that you have in Ontario. So for example, I'm an immigrant too, but I still need a plan here because my assets are here. If anything happens to you, the government still has control of your assets here, right? So I would say absolutely, 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 you need a plan here. Even if you want to retire back home, let's take care of your assets that are here, because you have to remember, the government will tax your assets. And the government will dictate how they get distributed here if you don't have a plan in place. So that is why you should be getting a plan, whether or not you want to retire here or you want to retire back home. Can you share a checklist for estate planning? So I would say if you're looking to get started, go back to that slide that I was talking about, where you have to have your goals in place, you have to have your assets, connect with a professional. I think that every law firm operates differently. So the law firm, I know the law firm I work with, they have a checklist that you can, you know, go and look at. But I think that every law firm will work differently. And I think too, every situation will be different. For example, if you own real estate or you don't own real estate, the way you plan will be differently. If you own assets in Ontario and outside Ontario, or even outside the country, all that will be treated differently. So I'd say the most important thing right now for you is to connect with a professional who can look at your specific situation and answer some of these questions. The next question is, me and my wife own separate and joint property. Should we do estate planning together or separately? So that's a good question. You should do, I think that it's good to be open. Like if your relationship is one where you communicate openly, you should do it together. I don't think it matters how you own the assets. If you have a very open conversation kind of relationship, then yes, you should do it together. When we did it with my family, we did it together. And it doesn't matter how we own the assets, it's just a matter of what's going to happen to these assets. And it's like a will is for an individual. So we cannot do a will for 2 people or 3 people at the same time. Every individual must have their own plan. If something were to happen to me, then what happens? If something were to happen to my spouse, then what happens? It's not a combined document. Every person will have their own document, but doing it together means that you agree on important matters like who takes custody of the kids, or So yes, I'd say do it together and have separate documents. And in some cases, actually it's more common than not, one person can have more than one will. You can have 2, 3, even in some cases 4 wills, right? But you have to connect with your lawyer to set that up. Okay. Oh, those were good questions. Any other questions? We have a few more minutes left. So if there's any questions, please post them. Otherwise, we'll just give a few, maybe 30 seconds, and then we'll end the webinar. I've been talking for 55 minutes. Alrighty, so it looks like I've covered all the questions that people submitted. Thank you very much for coming to this webinar. It's been an honor of mine to walk you through what I think is one of the most important aspects of wealth building. It doesn't matter how far you've come or where you're going. I think that every person, as we said, should have a will in place. And I'm hoping, and like I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an accountant, so there's no financial benefit for me giving this information. What I'm looking to do is help our clients, help those people around us. If we're building wealth, let's do it the right way. Again, as I said so many times, there's no point in building so much only to have it taken away. So let's do our proper planning to make sure that we're leaving our families and our loved ones in the best case scenario. Thank you so much for being on this webinar. Again, if you have any questions, reach out to me. I'm always happy to add value where I can. If you need me to connect you with a professional, please let me know, and I'll be happy to do that. Have a lovely evening, and stay in touch.